I'm hearing already a lot of concern about government funding not being reliable, if not going away completely. And so, how do some of these great ideas get the investment they need to scale or even to further develop? There's some great entrepreneurial classes here that are really more about bringing ideas forward, but sometimes they don't always have a great business sense. They're engineering types, and so they need partnership to figure out some of the business angles. But I've seen some, I guess I'm really not at liberty to talk about the specifics, but I've seen some very interesting and viable ideas in sustainable building materials, where every sector needs sustainable building materials. You think about concrete, you think about wood, you think about the type steel in particular, the types of materials that are expensive in an environment where we're looking at tariffs, but also climate intensive. And so with some great engineering ideas, to replace those materials or to produce them in a more efficient or climate sensitive manner, how do we help those ideas get out there?
Ideas or opportunities, ways that we could collaborate or work together. My big idea was after peers were coming to us to not just grow their business, but get more clients, generate revenue internally, and also looking for funding externally, either through investors or private equity. I thought this would be a great place to be able to connect people and do that freely and do that in a way that uh, people can reach out, and hopefully it includes me, but it doesn't have to. So my focus has been to be able to create a space that we can do that. And the big idea is this: with all the peers coming to us, so what if we do collaborative ventures? We call them co-ventures, as a way to be able to share not just strategies, but ideas, but also time, maybe funding, maybe connections. And so last year we stepped into cybersecurity a lot more, creating a cybersecurity academy, a space for training or educating companies on cybersecurity, as well as focusing on different vertical markets, especially the medical world that's highly attacked by cybersecurity. And along those lines, we've had other peers that offer different variables. Like government grants from Consulting Ace that offers also commercial incentives. Also, Entrepreneurs University to be able to have a space for small and medium and even large sized companies that they can further their business and be able to monetize it, as well as working with VenOps and compliance and risk management, Echo.ai, Savvy.ai. And I'm starting to find a lot more of our peers are focusing using AI tools and being able to incorporate that in their business, not just for healthcare or assessments or regulations, but in many different ways. Some of our other peers, Continuum Foundation, is focused on virtual solutions. Blockchain is big, obviously, for not just NFT or cryptocurrencies, but it's certainly the way of security going forward. Also working with Southeast Asia, Without World, and even nonprofit in like Blackbird Global Foundation to be able to look at areas that are philanthropic in nature and offering healthcare and kiosks to developing worlds, recycles, as well as for Centrica, many other areas. So my invitation is that you might consider joining our CoVentures mastermind group that we have on a weekly basis. And you can certainly participate with other leaders and be able to determine how you fit in. We also have an upcoming strategic investor session, March 6th. That's next week. The topic on that's going to be specific for leadership transformation, and building teams. So that's my big idea, as well as inviting you to join our peersontheman.com community, our events that we have on a pretty much a daily basis, and also our CoVentures world. So Rick, I wonder if you could say more about what is the big ideas we should be aware of this year in your business, the opportunities, the challenge. Rick Morgan.
A big idea, and it's got the support of two massive companies, the main company and their main division. They've developed a franchise arm to launch EV charging stations. So a person can take control of a territory and work with fleets, real estate, locations, administrative buildings, offices to install EV chargers. And this is to have the amount of chargers meet the growing demand or growth of EV vehicles on the road throughout the country. There are different estimates or forecasts of how many EV vehicles will be on the road by the 2030 and beyond. And then to meet that demand, the number of ports needed to charge that amount of electrical vehicles. So this company has developed this franchise arm with the support of that particular division called EverCharge, which is part of the SK Group out of Seoul, Korea, 140 billion in revenue. So that's a big idea that has entered into the franchise space. My ideal client is great corporate experience, built a division, launched a product, kind of within the corporate framework, had that entrepreneurial spirit, did something for the first time. Or also a young person who's got maybe 8-10 years of corporate experience, early 30s, late 20s, who's just hungry, ready to do something on their own. And then a business owner who has a calling. People ask him all the time, "Hey, I want to open your business in my town. When are you gonna let me do that?" And of course, they're successful, they're profitable, they've trademarked, they market. So those are ideal clients.
Allison, I wonder if you could say more. You're in the midst of a change in your business and your focus on sustainability. I'm not quite sure if you're going to be teaching at Duke University, but I wonder if you could say more about what's the big idea in your business in 2025,
Yeah.
Allison?
So yeah, I have a couple of angles. I guess my hat of being a sustainability officer at an agriculturally oriented company, which also had a lot of technology challenges. It was working on decarbonization in a thermal intensive environment. So most agricultural processing is thermal intensive. And so that means some renewable energy solutions are not very viable. So, there's from a role of being a sustainability officer, and I was in this role at Siemens for North America as well. So you see a lot of different problems. Some are core to the business, and some are core to the business's responsibility to do something like decarbonize. Here at Duke, because of that perspective, I guess I was asked to be what's essentially an executive in residence. So I'm not a professor teaching one class, although I'm guest lecturing all over and university wide. So it's engineering school, business school, environment school, etc. But also to be interacting with students, many of whom are very entrepreneurial. That's what a lot of them are here for. And they're graduate students here too, who actually are in their 30s, who are here in the Research Triangle area, if you don't know where Duke is. So there's a lot of startups and support for startups here. But I'm hearing already a lot of concern about government funding not being reliable, if not going away completely. And so how do some of these great ideas get the investment they need to scale or even to further develop? There's some great entrepreneurial classes here that are really more about bringing ideas forward, but sometimes they don't always have a great business sense. They're engineering types, and so they need partnership to figure out some of the business angles. But I've seen some, I guess I'm really not at liberty to talk about the specifics, but I've seen some very interesting and viable ideas in sustainable building materials, where every sector needs sustainable building materials. You think about concrete, you think about wood, you think about the type steel in particular, the types of materials that are expensive in an environment where we're looking at tariffs. but also climate intensive. And so with some great engineering ideas to replace those materials or to produce them in a more efficient or climate sensitive manner, how do we help those ideas get out there? So that's part of what I'm interested in listening to this group about. I spoke very briefly and specifically about agriculture. Not only do those types of even startup ideas help a big company that's trying to figure out with whom to partner in order to reduce its own footprint in its plants, but also on the agricultural side, there's a lot of interest in regenerative agriculture, which is essentially using indigenous type practices, no-till, cover cropping, et cetera, which I see is, by the way, being utilized in the cannabis industry. Regen ag is that in that way. But that's sort of the big idea that we've been working on for a while. I think the obstacle is getting farmers to take up these practices, to understand the importance for resilience in their supply chains, but also to have a pull, a consumer awareness, a buyer awareness of the importance of these practices, not only for the environment, but even potentially for their health. So those are some of the big ideas we've been working on in the agriculture space, and will probably continue for quite a while.
If we could get the return on investment this year, then you would get a lot of attention. The marketing would suddenly show up a lot better. So can you speak about that? How do you shorten the ROI for climate change sustainability, Allison?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely depends on the technology that you're talking about, because there's some things that are just inherently going to be a longer term. For instance, if you're planting cover crops on a farm, that takes about 3 years to take hold. And that's when you're going to start measuring the organic matter in the soil, which is, in other words, carbon being sequestered in the soil. Now, that's not an insurmountable period of time, but it is hard to see the data, the return, which can then be monetized either in the form of potentially a carbon credit, or for the farmer in the way in which many companies are operating now. They'll actually pay the farmer a premium for having that data, for having done that carbon sequestration, because when they buy that product from that farm, their carbon emissions associated with that product are lower. And they'll have goals and they'll have things that, they're trying to demonstrate that they're saving carbon in their supply chain. So there actually is a premium that ADM's customer will pay to ADM. ADM in turn pays that premium to the farmer. That's a pretty fast return for the farmer anyway, because even though his cover cropping hasn't come in, he'll get a premium for that crop in the very first year. So there are ways in which we found those financial models in kind of the big company context. I think for something innovative like green building material, which is going to have to scale in order to be big enough in terms of availability for big buildings, for instance. There's going to have to be sources of funding, those who see that there's a demand for this, those who see that, for instance, it could even be more cost effective than a competitor where there are tariffs attached and creating more costs. So it depends on the technology. But I think, everybody understands, believe it or not, sustainability people do, especially if you've worked in a business, that there always has to be a business case, there always has to be a return. And investors, I worked in a privately or publicly held business, but it's true of privately held businesses as well. Your investors care about that return, and they're not going to want you to do great climate things at the expense of their return. That's never on the table.
Listen, this is in our wheelhouse. So we've been working on carbon credits and things for the last 4 years. So one of the things that I'm finally seeing happening is there's a demand for hemp that we haven't seen in the last 5, 6 years. So I have a brokerage firm out in Colorado that's actually signing farmers up pre-seed time. So we're getting in traditional farming practices now to grow hemp so they can use it for CBD related products. On the other hand, I spoke last week to a company called Heartland out of Detroit
Yeah.
that has signed contracts with farmers. They're saying the seed genetics have to be, they expect in about 2 years, the seed genetics will be at a point will produce an equivalent yield that will of what the farmers are earning from corn and soybean. That
Mhm.
see, Rick, some of the things I've learned from the Midwest, leaving California, but they use the industrial hemp for plastics in automobiles. They have
Mhm.
contracts to supply those agreements. So part of what we're trying to do, and I put a couple of links in the chat for people to look at, is one is on carbon credits and how that whole industry is working. The second is highlighting a show that we worked with a partner in Australia to tape about building hemp homes.
Mhm.
And so we're seeing the numbers on those going up. So what we're trying to do is how do we use our TV platform to share those stories, right, to increase awareness of the community. And so that's one of the most popular areas that we're seeing growth. So anyway,
Great, thank you. I
yeah,
like building homes with hemp. That's really
yeah.
cool.
Well, in California, they could use more of them because they also are fire retardant.
Ah, I
Oh,
did not know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So with hempcrete, you can put a torch to it and it's not going to catch fire.
I also have another medical business that focuses in sports medicine products. Sports medicine surgery has an enormous amount of disposable waste.
Mhm.
So I recently was hosting a dinner in which I was introducing a green initiative from a French company to sports medicine surgeons to reduce that footprint. And literally all I got were sneers. That being literally, it just immediately morphed into some political knee-jerk
Yeah.
reaction.
Mhm. Yeah.
Some Frenchified environmental concern.
Right.
It was just, I thought it was a great idea, because the amount of waste in sports medicine surgery, which is generally unknown to the public, is huge. Every little thing they use, they open a sterile pack, and it generates literally a truckload of stuff from an average day in a surgery center. Anyway, I just thought I would throw that out there because I'm kind of, empathetic to your mission.
the first big idea, Sam?
Wow, there are, for me, it's been 30-year journey, entrepreneurship, started in franchising, just dived into it, got into technology. And along the way, I got into economic equality, connected with local biodiversity volunteer projects of all the things. So, the question is, how do we connect individuals on the ground? And if there is any biodiversity, if there is any volunteer type of effort, how can we get the locals involved from India, Africa, South Africa, South America? One thing that we have done is we launched a volunteer nature conservancy. We have about 10,000 members. We are doing our best to now find an economic equality solutions for as many of those individuals as possible. And what is economic equality is just giving those individuals an opportunity to earn a living while they are looking for our biodiversity on the field. Now, with taxes and with green initiatives all around the world, these uneducated people have no idea what we are doing here, and yet they're in charge. So again, a good example just in Southern California, we did count for the reptiles, snakes. In India, we did count for reptiles, alligators, and birds. I know you guys don't go just stand and take a look at the skies, but a decade ago, around the world, we used to have flocks, millions of birds flying. You go to developing nations today, and I can guarantee you, you will not see the amount of birds which were flying a decade ago. So it is an emergency for someone like me. I have two daughters, we have children. And when it comes to my franchising experience, my tax experience, I tell everyone, become an entrepreneur. And the reason I can do that is I can help them with their paperwork. I know LLCs are different here than probably in other countries, but if people get a piece of paper in their hand, and if someone is giving them an authority, it changes their life. Someone has to believe in them, right? Educate them. And the goal is, we have connected all these things, and now the funding is about to disappear. So corporate funding is the only way going out, and the way to do that is getting everyone, aware that unless you pull out a penny, no one else is going to do it for us. Unless you volunteer, no one is going to do that for us. and I do my best to educate. And really, I do want to connect with those of you who are in the field. I know all of you are extremely busy, but if you give us a little bit time on Zoom like this, it would be amazing to know about the initiative. And final thing, some of you mentioned about green tax or green initiatives. In California, there is a green tax initiative, and I've been working with that for the last 10 years. So if you see any movement which happened, there is an amazing group of people. There are senators, there are politicians who are involved. So collaboration is a way to go, and joint venture is the only way I see that we can pull ourselves out of this muddy waters we are in. Anyone who graduates with a bachelor's or master's, and there are few in PhDs in environmental sciences. No matter which country you're in, they are not going to get any other job going and trying to save a plant. You are going to end up being in corporate or government jobs. By making them aware of opportunities and what they can do, even a small side entrepreneurship for master's people, PhD people, these are passionate people about whatever bird they may like, or whatever plant they may like, or whatever they are into, but they do need mentorship, tremendous mentorship. And it's a very slow process. It took us 10 years to get to 10,000. We will get to 100,000. But again, remember that a lot of these individuals are not in our country. That means we have to, it took time to understand culture in South Africa, whether you like it or not. I am an alien there. I am also alien in South America or India, right? So understanding it, getting the educated people together and to get them volunteer, that's the purpose. And we do yearly alligator counts. We do yearly sparrow counts. We do like all these different type of things. And it has worked. Educated people definitely, and the kids, they love to teach others, especially non-educated, and it gives them a little bit oomph before they actually walk into corporate or government jobs.
But you may be aware that there is a biodiversity crisis, which has been, documented and talked about in many different places. I actually think that nature is going to be the topic that it takes over climate change. And, these are long-term topics. So what's happening in the next 4 years in one country isn't necessarily going to stop what's happening in the world in reality. But I think that the need for understanding biodiversity, the loss of biodiversity, and then in giving at least the information to various actors who need to take action. They could be corporates, they could be governments. It's really upon us. Governments around the world have already taken a biodiversity pledge, 30% by 30, and companies, publicly traded in particular, are being approached by a lot of investors about what's your impact on nature and biodiversity and what are you going to do about it. So it seems like there could be some connection because I think what a lot of companies are looking for is how to demonstrate they're taking action. And it does tend to be a very local action that has to be taken. It's not just one global goal because biodiversity changes so much depending on where you are. And so, maybe plugging into this network, the network giving data to entities that need it, especially in certain areas around the world, could be important. I think also a lot of nonprofits are starting to work a lot more on this issue. Not that they were never aware, but they're focusing in because they see that corporates are actually going to wind up potentially doing financial disclosure on the topic of their impact on biodiversity. That is already required in Europe and the UK. So, there's a reason why a lot of companies are actually paying attention to this.
Citizen Green TV is a video on demand streaming network that's on Roku, Apple TV, Android, the whole bit. Okay. We are a blockchain company, so we're using it to move into the world of providing NFTs that can serve as advertisements that allow the viewer to pause, scan a QR code, and interact with a product. As we move forward, we're starting to look at how we can use NFTs for even things like raising funding, okay? In terms of how do we, there are crypto investors out there. And so giving them a platform where they can create content or fund content. So one of the big ideas out there is Twitter. I don't know if everybody knows Elon Musk is positioning every state to get what's called a money transfer license for Twitter. And the objective behind it is he wants to be able to allow the viewer to be able to pay for content that could be a fraction of a penny. So micropayments. And you can't do it with your credit card. You can't do it obviously with cash, right? But with crypto, you have an ability where you could say, "Hey, listen, I want to contribute a penny to that content, to that cause." Well, frankly, using the blockchain, you collect enough pennies, you can transfer it into dollars and put it into real bank accounts. So those are some of the things that are floating around out there that people should be aware of. Okay, when you pull out cash out of your wallet, people almost fall over these days, right? And so I think the next step where we're heading with electronic wallets. Okay, that's where the industry is going to be in the next 2 or 3 years. Okay, and then especially even when you hear Trump talking about Canada, U.S., and Mexico, really the whole thing is not to make Canada a 51st state, but it's to really create like the euro dollar equivalent in North America. So that will also take a shape into crypto as well, so people can transact easier, right? And in different forms without worrying about currency exchange, et cetera, et cetera. We are working, for example, with Montel Williams. We're in the process of adding his show and his followers. I didn't realize he was a former Navy SEAL in his early days, and so he has a very big following these days. But just reach out to me, and if you want to advertise, or frankly, Allison, like even with what you're talking about with sustainability, I think more and more education type shows is the fastest growing segment, frankly, on Roku is the 50 plus. Okay. People are cutting the cable like crazy. So right now, US wide, 48% of the market is getting their content via streaming channels through the internet. And so one of the things that we difference ourselves a little bit is, unlike your cable TV or your over your airways, that's considered linear, right? We're considered connected TV, which means server to server, PC to PC. So it allows us more freedom in terms of how we can deliver our message to the audience. So anyway, it's a rapidly moving environment.
Let's hear from Bruce Burkhoff. He has a different perspective on marketing. He's the CMO, Chief Marketing Officer for LightSense Technology. And Bruce, I wonder if you could share more about what's a big idea in your business, your industry, opportunity, challenge, but first, big idea. Bruce?
Well, big idea is really all of the above, right? Everything has its place. Digital marketing, paid marketing, relationships, they all are useful in certain ways, but how much you spend and the ROI is very different depending on what you're spending, what the economy's doing, what the macro, micro economic issues are. So I don't think there's magic other than understanding what you're trying to promote, the value proposition, and making messaging both clear and entertaining, right? And I'm interested. I hadn't heard of Citizen Green TV, but I've known people doing green TV stuff before, and I invented one of the first green TV logos just to show ones that would save electricity. But I do think it's an important aspect. I'm helping companies now in the cannabis space with some of the science-related products I work with, because we can find and eliminate certain issues they have, like volatile organic compounds that make the smells happen, but also some of the molds and pests that can hurt crops of different types, using different spectroscopy techniques and different types of safe but effective handling. Like we can use certain hydrogen peroxide overnight when no one's around and eliminate both the pest and organic volatile organic compounds. But so the real thing is to understand what you're trying to do and how to position it with the value proposition for your customers. Because if they're not benefiting, then you don't deserve them as customers.
And also, big idea for this year, especially since you've developed an AI tool. Mark?
Yeah. So my company, VinOps, does regulatory compliance, which is very boring. And but it's necessary if you're in the healthcare world. And so that's our basic business. We are, however, introducing other products to help independent medical practices, especially, and rural hospitals, especially, both of whom we think are important to the healthcare ecosystem. They practice just good medicine, and in rural hospitals, very often that's all they have. If somebody gets sick or has a trauma, they don't want to travel 50 miles to save their life, but they very much are in trouble. So we are introducing an AI product called CoVentures, which we hope will help some of them be more sustainable by reducing some of their overhead and doing some mundane things like answering the phone, making appointments, doing marketing services on what the physician's practice or hospital may actually provide, not anything clinical or anything like that, just basically sharing information. And we hope by doing that, that will help the independent medical market. I did a webinar on the 11th called Using AI in Your Medical Practice in 2025. I had the chief of orthopedics from Kaiser Permanente, Geisinger, a couple of other AI scientists and physicians. And what the conclusion at the meeting was that the best way to help doctors in medical practices today is reduce their need for clinical documentation, which is as much as 50% of their clinical day, believe it or not. And it's just, that's basically putting information into the electronic medical record. Whereas they used to just dictate it and it would go off to the transcriptionist, very often in India, come back, go into the file and be done with it. Anyway, so that's what I'm doing, Rocky. That's my big idea. AI will be everywhere in healthcare.